The Zephyrian Empire had ruled the galaxy for over 3,000 years. Their crystalline ships, powered by captured starlight, moved between systems like graceful dancers across the cosmic stage. Emperor Vex then stood on the observation deck of his flagship, the Stellar Crown, watching as his fleet approached the outer rim of what the locals called the Milky Way. "Your Excellence," came the voice of Admiral Kethare, her forearms folded in the traditional pose of respect. "The advanced scouts have returned with their preliminary reports on the new species." Vex then turned, his tall, elegant frame casting shadows across the polished floor. His skin shimmered with the natural bioluminescence that marked all Zephyrian nobility, patterns of blue and gold dancing across his features like living tattoos. "Tell me what they found, Admiral." "They call themselves humans, Excellence. They inhabit a single world in the third orbit of a yellow star. Our scouts observed them for several cycles before making contact." Kethare paused, consulting her data tablet. "They appear to be a young species, Excellence. No faster-than-light travel, primitive energy sources, and they still engage in warfare among their own kind." The Emperor nodded slowly. This was the usual pattern. The galaxy was filled with young species who needed guidance, protection, and the benevolent rule of the Zephyrian Empire. Some joined willingly after witnessing the Empire's glory. Others required more persuasion. "What of their military capabilities?" Vex then asked, though the question was mostly ceremonial. A species without interstellar travel posed no real threat to ships that could cross the galaxy in weeks. "Minimal, Excellence. They use chemical propulsion for their spacecraft, projectile weapons for warfare, and their largest vessels are barely 300 meters in length. Our scouts estimate that a single battlecruiser could pacify their entire world within hours." "And their response to first contact?" Admiral Kethare's expression grew slightly puzzled. "That is unusual, Excellence. When our scouts revealed themselves and transmitted the standard greeting protocols, the humans requested a meeting. Not with their military leaders or planetary rulers, but with what they called their diplomatic corps." Emperor Vex then raised an eyebrow, the bioluminescent patterns on his face shifting to show mild interest. In his experience, primitive species typically responded to first contact in one of two ways, either with worship and immediate submission or with fear and aggression. Requesting diplomacy was unexpected. They wished to negotiate. "It appears so, Excellence. They've invited a delegation to meet at a neutral location between their world and the edge of their solar system. A small space station they've constructed for this purpose." The Emperor considered this. The Zephyrian Empire had specific protocols for dealing with new species, but those protocols assumed either immediate submission or resistance. Diplomatic meetings were usually reserved for species that had already demonstrated some level of interstellar capability. "How many ships did they send to escort our scouts?" "None, Excellence. None." Vexton's patterns flashed with surprise. "They made no show of force. No demonstration of their military might." "No, Excellence. They sent only a single small vessel with 3 occupants. Our scouts reported that the humans seemed curious about our technology, but not intimidated by it. This was highly irregular. Every species the Empire had encountered in 3 millennia had either cowered in terror at their first sight of Zephyrian technology or had immediately mobilized their military forces. The idea that a primitive species would respond with simple curiosity was almost incomprehensible. "Perhaps they don't understand the implications," suggested Admiral Kethare. "Their primitive sensors might not have been able to properly assess our capabilities." "Perhaps." But Vexton wasn't convinced. His scouts were trained observers, and they had specifically mentioned that the humans had requested technical specifications of Zephyrian vessels. Not defensive capabilities or weapon systems, but technical specifications, as if they were studying them. "Excellence, there is one more thing." Kethare hesitated. "The humans asked specifically to speak with decision-makers from our empire. They indicated that they understood we represented a larger civilization and wanted to establish what they called formal diplomatic relations. They want to establish relations with the empire itself." Vexton's patterns shifted to show deep thought. "Not just with the local fleet or sector command?" "Yes, Excellence. They specifically asked about our governmental structure and requested to meet with someone who could speak for the empire as a whole." This was unprecedented. Young species typically focused on immediate threats and opportunities. They dealt with whatever ships were in their local space, not the civilization those ships represented. The fact that these humans immediately grasped the larger implications suggested a level of strategic thinking that shouldn't exist in a species confined to a single world. Admiral, I want a full strategic analysis of this human species. Deploy additional scouts, but keep them at maximum stealth. I want to know everything about these beings before we proceed. Yes, Excellence. Shall I inform the humans that we accept their request for a meeting? Vex then moved to the massive viewing screen that dominated the far wall of his command chamber. Stars stretched in all directions, countless worlds under the benevolent protection of the Zephyrian Empire. Each had been brought into the fold through careful application of overwhelming superiority and generous offers of advancement under Imperial guidance. Not yet, Admiral. First, I want to understand what makes these humans different. Over the following weeks, Admiral Ketharay's expanded reconnaissance revealed a picture that grew more puzzling by the day. The humans, it appeared, were not just unusual in their diplomatic approach. They were unusual in almost every conceivable way. Their homeworld, designated Earth by the humans themselves, was a remarkably diverse planet. Most species evolved on worlds with relatively uniform conditions, but Earth seemed to contain almost every possible environment. Frozen polar regions, vast deserts, dense forests, enormous oceans, and towering mountain ranges all existed on the same world. The humans had not only adapted to this diversity, but had spread to every corner of their planet. Excellence, reported Scout Commander Yilvar during one of the daily briefings. The humans appear to be a single species, but they exhibit remarkable variation. Different groups have adapted to different environments on their world, developing distinct physical characteristics while remaining genetically compatible. Interesting. Most species achieve planetary dominance by adapting their environment to suit their needs. These humans have adapted themselves to their environment. Yes, Excellence, but that's not the most unusual aspect. They appear to have developed multiple competing civilizations simultaneously. Vex then leaned forward. Competing how? They're divided into what they call nations, separate governmental entities that control different regions of their world. These nations maintain distinct cultures, languages, and political systems. Some cooperate, others compete, and a few are in active conflict. This was almost unthinkable. Every species the Empire had encountered had achieved unity before reaching interstellar capability. The idea that a species could develop advanced technology while still divided into competing factions was contrary to everything the Zephyrians understood about social evolution. How do they coordinate their response to outside threats? Who speaks for their species? That's complicated, Excellence. They have an organization called the United Nations that facilitates cooperation between their various nations, but it appears to have limited authority. When our scouts made contact, multiple nations responded independently. Multiple responses? How many nations wanted to establish diplomatic contact? Scout Commander Yilvar checked his notes. All of them, Excellence. 195 separate governmental entities, each wanting to participate in first contact protocols. Emperor Vex then sat in stunned silence. The logistics alone were staggering. How could anyone negotiate with nearly 200 separate governments? More importantly, how had a species managed to reach their current level of development while maintaining such a bewildering level of political fragmentation? Commander, in your observation of their military capabilities, did you note which nation possesses the most advanced weapons? Excellence, that's another unusual aspect. The humans appear to have developed weapons capable of destroying their entire world, and several nations possess these weapons. Several nations have world-ending capabilities? Yes, Excellence. Our analysis suggests that if their major nations engaged in full conflict, their entire civilization could be eliminated within hours. Yet they continue to maintain this balance without destroying themselves. The Emperor stood and walked to his viewing screen again. In his experience, species that developed such destructive capabilities either used them to establish global dominance or destroyed themselves in the attempt. The idea that multiple factions could possess civilization-ending weapons and still maintain some form of stability was almost impossible to comprehend. Excellence, Admiral Ketharay interjected. Perhaps this explains their diplomatic approach. A species that has learned to manage such dangerous internal tensions might naturally default to negotiation rather than confrontation. Perhaps. But it raises another question. If they're accustomed to dealing with threats that could destroy their entire world, how do they view us? The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything the Empire understood about first contact. The Zephyrians had always operated from a position of unquestioned superiority. Their technology, their unity, their 3,000-year dominance of the galaxy had made them the undisputed masters of every situation. But these humans weren't responding like subjects meeting their new masters. They were responding like equals meeting potential partners. Admiral, I want a complete analysis of their military capabilities. Not just their current technology, but their development patterns. How quickly do they advance? What is their capacity for innovation? Excellence. Our preliminary analysis suggests their rate of technological advancement is unprecedented. In the last century of their development, they've progressed from powered flight to orbital spaceflight. They've gone from primitive communication systems to global information networks that can transmit data instantly to any point on their planet. How does that compare to our historical development rate? Admiral Kethare consulted her records. Excellence. It took our civilization nearly 1,000 years to achieve similar progress. The humans have compressed that timeline into a single century. Emperor Vex then felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: uncertainty. The Zephyrian Empire had encountered hundreds of species over 3 millennia. They had refined their approach to first contact until it was a precise science. Show overwhelming superiority, offer generous terms for submission, and guide the new species into the Empire's benevolent embrace. But these humans didn't fit the pattern. They weren't intimidated by superior technology. They weren't unified under a single government that could make species-wide decisions. They possessed destructive capabilities that should have led to their extinction, but had somehow achieved stability instead. And they were advancing technologically at a rate that seemed impossible. Admiral, how long before they develop faster than light travel? Our analysts estimate anywhere from 50 to 200 years, Excellence, based on their current rate of progress. And how long before they develop weapons that could threaten Imperial ships? The silence that followed was answer enough. Admiral Kethare's patterns had shifted to show deep concern. Excellence, based on their advancement rate, and their apparent ability to innovate under pressure, possibly within the same time frame. For the first time in his reign, Emperor Vex then found himself contemplating a scenario that had never occurred in Imperial history: first contact with a species that might become a peer rather than a subject. Admiral, send a message to the humans. Inform them that I will personally attend their diplomatic meeting. And Admiral? Yes, Excellence. Bring the full royal fleet. If these humans are as unusual as they appear, I want them to understand exactly who they're dealing with. What Emperor Vex then didn't know was that the humans had been preparing for this moment since the first Zephyrian scout had appeared in their system. And their preparations had been far more extensive than anyone could have imagined. The royal fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the human solar system like a constellation of deadly stars. 300 ships arranged in perfect formation, their crystalline hulls catching and reflecting light from the distant yellow sun. At the center, the stellar crown dominated the formation, its massive bulk dwarfing even the largest Imperial battle cruisers. Emperor Vex then stood on his command deck, watching as his fleet took position. This was the largest force the Empire had ever deployed for a first contact situation. But something about the humans demanded such measures. His scouts had continued their observations over the past month, and each report had only deepened the mystery. Excellence, Admiral Kethare approached with her usual respectful bearing. But Vex then could see the tension in her posture. We're receiving multiple communications from the human homeworld. Multiple? Yes, Excellence. 67 separate transmissions from different locations on their planet. They appear to be welcoming messages. Emperor Vex then's bioluminescent patterns shifted to show confusion. When the Empire arrived at a new world, the typical response was either terrified silence or frantic military preparations. Welcome messages from dozens of different sources was completely outside his experience. Are they coordinated? Some kind of planned response? No, Excellence. Each message appears to be independent. Some are from their governmental entities, others from what they call universities and research institutions, and several from individuals who claim to represent different cultural groups. Individuals? Vex then couldn't hide his surprise. Private citizens are responding to Imperial contact. Yes, Excellence. And not just responding. Several are requesting permission to visit our ships. They've submitted detailed proposals for what they call cultural exchange programs. The Emperor moved to his tactical display, watching as his sensors mapped the inner solar system. The humans had been busy since first contact. Their space station at the meeting coordinates had been expanded significantly, and there were now dozens of small spacecraft moving between their homeworld and various locations throughout their system. Admiral, what is the nature of their activity? Are they evacuating their population? Preparing defensive positions? Neither, Excellence. They appear to be exploring. Their spacecraft are conducting what our analysts believe to be scientific surveys of their outer planets. They've also constructed several new orbital installations around their homeworld. Orbital defenses? No, Excellence. Orbital laboratories and manufacturing facilities. They're using the arrival of our fleet as an opportunity to accelerate their space-based infrastructure development. Emperor Vex then stared at the tactical display. Instead of cowering in fear or mobilizing for war, the humans were treating the arrival of an overwhelming Imperial fleet as a chance to expand their civilization. It was as if they had no concept of the danger they were in. Excellence, came another voice from across the command deck. We're receiving a direct transmission from the human diplomatic station. Put it through. The main viewing screen shimmered and resolved into an image that made several members of the Imperial command staff gasp. 3 humans sat at what appeared to be a conference table, but, behind them, through a large transparent barrier, stars were clearly visible. The humans had constructed their meeting facility with a view of open space that would have terrified most species. The central human, a middle-aged female with graying hair, spoke in the clear, measured tones that the Empire's translators had learned to recognize as formal diplomatic language. Greetings, Emperor Vex Than of the Zephyrian Empire. I am Secretary General Chun of the United Nations of Earth. We are honored by your presence and grateful for your willingness to meet with representatives of our species. Emperor Vex then moved forward, his imposing height and the brilliant patterns of his royal markings clearly visible on the transmission. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of 3 millennia of unquestioned rule. I am Emperor Vex Than, sovereign of the Zephyrian Empire, ruler of 800 systems, guardian of 47 species. I have come to welcome your world into the imperial embrace and to offer your people the protection and guidance of our civilization. The humans exchanged what appeared to be meaningful glances, but Secretary General Chen's expression remained professionally neutral. We appreciate the offer, Your Excellence, and we're eager to learn more about the Zephyrian Empire. However, we should clarify that Earth operates under a system of sovereign nations, each with the right to make independent decisions about their future. Any agreement would need to be negotiated with all of our governmental entities. All of your governmental entities. Emperor Vex Than's patterns shifted to show mild irritation. How many decision-making bodies claim authority over your world? Currently, 195 nations hold membership in the United Nations, though several additional entities maintain various degrees of autonomy or dispute recognition. We estimate that meaningful negotiations would require input from approximately 200 separate governmental bodies. The silence on the Imperial command deck was profound. Admiral Kethare looked as if she had just been told that the laws of physics had been suspended. Other members of the command staff were displaying patterns associated with confusion and disbelief. You're suggesting, Emperor Vex then said slowly, that the Empire negotiate 200 separate agreements to establish relations with your species? We understand that this may seem complex from your perspective, Your Excellence, but we believe it's important that each nation have the opportunity to participate in determining their own future. We've actually prepared preliminary documentation outlining various possible frameworks for multi-party negotiations. One of the other humans, a younger male, activated what appeared to be a holographic display. Complex diagrams and flowcharts appeared in the space above their table, showing interconnected networks of relationships and decision-making processes that made Admiral Kethare's head spin. If I may, the young human continued, we've studied the limited information available about the Zephyrian Empire's governmental structure, and we believe there are several models that could accommodate both our political diversity and your administrative requirements. Emperor Vex then found himself staring at displays that showed organizational complexity beyond anything the Empire had ever encountered. The humans weren't just politically fragmented, they were actively celebrating that fragmentation as a strength. Furthermore, Secretary General Chen added, we've received expressions of interest from several of our nations in establishing bilateral agreements directly with various sectors of the Zephyrian Empire. For instance, our Pacific Island nations are particularly interested in marine environmental technology, while our polar regions are eager to learn about extreme environment adaptation techniques. You want to establish separate agreements with different parts of the Empire? We recognize that an organization spanning 800 systems must have tremendous internal diversity. Rather than assuming that one-size-fits-all solutions will work, we thought it might be more efficient to match specific human populations with Zephyrian communities that share similar interests or face similar challenges. Admiral Kethare stepped forward, her patterns showing barely controlled alarm. Excellence. This level of complexity would require entirely new administrative structures. The Empire has no precedent for managing relationships with politically fragmented species. That's actually why we're so excited about this opportunity, said the third human, an elderly male with what appeared to be ceremonial decorations on his clothing. Humanity has extensive experience managing complex multi-party relationships. We'd be happy to share our expertise in international diplomacy, conflict resolution, and collaborative governance. Emperor Vex then felt the world shifting beneath his feet. These humans weren't just asking to join the Empire. They were offering to teach the Empire new ways of governing. You're offering to share governmental technology with us. Of course, Your Excellence. We assume that this relationship will be mutually beneficial. You have technologies and perspectives that could greatly benefit humanity, and we have social innovations and organizational techniques that might be useful to the Empire. Social innovations? Well, for instance, we noticed that the Empire appears to be a hierarchical monarchy with centralized decision-making. That's certainly an effective model for many purposes, but we've developed some interesting alternatives. Democratic federalism, distributed consensus mechanisms, market-based resource allocation systems, collaborative research networks. We'd be happy to discuss how any of these might complement existing imperial structures. The human spoke as casually as if she were discussing the weather, apparently unaware that she had just suggested modifications to a governmental system that had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. Excellence, Admiral Kethare whispered urgently. These beings appear to have no understanding of their situation. Should we clarify the nature of imperial sovereignty? But, before Emperor Vex then could respond, Secretary General Chun was speaking again. We should also mention that we've been monitoring your fleet's arrival with great interest. Your faster-than-light transportation technology is obviously far beyond our current capabilities, but we've observed some fascinating engineering principles. Several of our research institutions have preliminary questions about your energy capture and storage systems, if you'd be willing to engage in some technical discussions. You've been studying our ships? Only the observable phenomena, of course. We would never attempt unauthorized scanning of foreign vessels. But the energy signatures visible from your engines have provided some interesting data points for our theoretical physics research. The young male activated his holographic display again, and suddenly, the space above the table was filled with complex mathematical equations and three-dimensional models that looked remarkably similar to imperial engineering schematics. We're particularly curious about the quantum mechanics underlying your faster-than-light drives. Our current models suggest several possible approaches to achieving similar effects, but we'd love to compare notes with your engineers. Emperor Vex then stared at the display. The mathematics were different from imperial techniques, but they were clearly sophisticated and, in several areas, appeared to be more elegant than the Empire's own solutions. How long have you been developing faster-than-light theory? About 70 years for the serious mathematical work, though the philosophical foundations go back about 4 centuries. We've been unable to test most of our theories due to technological limitations, but your arrival has provided some wonderful opportunities for observational verification. 70 years. Admiral Kethare's patterns were now displaying something approaching panic. Excellence. Our intelligence estimates suggested they were at least 50 years away from achieving faster-than-light capability. Oh, we're much closer than that, the elderly human said cheerfully. We expect to have our first experimental faster-than-light engine within the next 5 to 10 years. Observing your fleet has already solved several critical engineering challenges. 5 to 10 years. Emperor Vexthen's voice carried a note of something that might have been alarm. Possibly sooner. The energy patterns we've observed from your engines have confirmed some of our theoretical work and eliminated several dead-end research paths. We might be able to accelerate our timeline significantly. Excellence, Admiral Kethare said, her voice tight with controlled urgency. Perhaps we should discuss imperial policy regarding technology sharing and development timelines. But Secretary General Chun was continuing. That raises another point we wanted to discuss. We're very interested in establishing collaborative research relationships with imperial scientists. Humanity has always believed that scientific advancement benefits from diverse perspectives and shared effort. You want to collaborate on research projects? Absolutely. We've identified several areas where human and Zephyrian approaches might complement each other beautifully. For instance, your energy capture technology combined with human materials science could yield some fascinating results. And our experience with large-scale social organization might help optimize resource distribution across imperial systems. Emperor Vex then found himself in completely uncharted territory. The humans were treating this first contact not as a subject meeting their new rulers, but as equals meeting potential partners. More than that, they were actively proposing ways to improve imperial technology and governance. We should also mention, the young male added, that we've prepared welcome packages for your crew members. We understand that you've been traveling for some time, and we thought you might appreciate some variety in your food supplies and entertainment options. Entertainment options? Music, literature, visual arts, games. We've assembled collections representing all of Earth's major cultures. We thought it might be interesting for your people to experience human creativity. Excellence, Admiral Kethare whispered. They're treating our fleet like visiting tourists. And, indeed, the humans seemed completely unconcerned by the fact that they were facing the most powerful military force in the galaxy. Instead, they were offering cultural exchanges, scientific collaboration, and political advice as if the Emperor were a neighbor who had dropped by for a friendly visit. Your Excellence, Secretary General Chin said, we've prepared detailed proposals for several possible frameworks for human-imperial relations. Would you like to review them now, or would you prefer to begin with some of the cultural exchanges? We have several teams standing by to provide tours of human facilities, and we'd be honored to receive visits from your representatives. Emperor Vex then looked around his command deck at the confused and increasingly alarmed faces of his officers. In 3,000 years, the Empire had never encountered anything like this. These humans weren't just different. They were operating from completely alien assumptions about power, relationships, and the nature of first contact itself. Admiral, he said quietly, I think we may need to reconsider our approach. But, even as he spoke, Emperor Vex then couldn't shake the feeling that the humans had already considered their approach very carefully indeed. And that perhaps, for the first time in Imperial history, they were the ones who needed to adapt to a new species rather than the other way around. 3 days into what was supposed to be a standard Imperial annexation, Emperor Vex then found himself sitting in the most unusual conference room he had ever entered. The human space station had been expanded again overnight, and the new diplomatic facility was a marvel of adaptive architecture. Multiple gravitational fields accommodated different species requirements. Atmospheric controls allowed for various breathing preferences, and the furniture could reconfigure itself for beings of different sizes and anatomical structures. We wanted to make sure all participants would be comfortable, explained Dr. Sarah Kim, the human xenobiologist who had designed the facility. We assumed that the Empire includes multiple species with different environmental needs. She was correct, of course. The Empire did include dozens of species, each with their own requirements. But, typically, conquered species were expected to adapt to Imperial standards, not the other way around. The idea that humans would automatically accommodate the needs of beings they had never met was another example of their baffling approach to relationships. Emperor Vex then was not alone in this meeting. Admiral Kethare sat beside him, along with Imperial Xenologist Dr. Zarthek and Chief Imperial Negotiator Velnara. Across from them sat not just Secretary General Chan, but representatives from 12 different human nations, 2 international scientific organizations, and something called a non-governmental organization that apparently spoke for people who weren't officially represented by any government. Before we begin formal discussions, Secretary General Chin said, we thought it might be helpful to share some information about Earth's history and how we've learned to manage relationships between different groups. That's unnecessary. Chief Negotiator Velnara replied with the confidence of 3 millennia of successful conquests. The Empire's standard protocols have proven effective for integrating new species into Imperial civilization. We're sure they have, said Ambassador Rodriguez, the representative from something called the European Union. But we thought you might be interested in some alternative approaches. Humanity has extensive experience with political integration, cultural preservation, economic cooperation, and conflict resolution. Dr. Zarthek leaned forward, his research instincts overcoming diplomatic protocol. Alternative approaches to what? To governance, resource management, technological development, social organization. Really, To almost every challenge facing large-scale civilizations, replied Dr. Elena Petrov, the representative from the International Scientific Union. Dr. Petrov, Admiral Kethare said with poorly concealed irritation, the Zephyrian Empire has successfully governed 800 systems for 3,000 years. We hardly need instruction in civilization management. Of course not, Dr. Petrov replied cheerfully. But different approaches can be useful for different situations. For instance, how does the Empire handle rapid technological development across multiple species with different capabilities? We provide advanced technology to member species as they demonstrate readiness to receive it, Velnara answered confidently. Interesting. Who determines readiness? Imperial administrators, naturally. And how do you handle situations where member species develop technologies independently that exceed Imperial capabilities in specific areas? The silence that followed was profound. In 3,000 years, no member species had ever developed technology that exceeded Imperial capabilities. The question itself was nearly incomprehensible. That scenario doesn't occur, Admiral Kethare said finally. Really? But surely with dozens of species working on different problems, occasionally someone must develop a novel solution that improves on existing Imperial technology. Member species don't conduct independent research, Dr. Zarthek explained. They work within Imperial research frameworks under Imperial supervision. So there's no competitive innovation, no independent development, no cross-pollination of ideas between different species approaches. The humans were looking genuinely puzzled, as if the Empire had just explained that they had voluntarily chosen to limit themselves to using only one hand. The Imperial system ensures efficiency and prevents duplication of effort, Velnara said. But, for the first time in his career, he found himself questioning whether efficiency was the only important consideration. Ambassador Rodriguez activated a holographic display that showed a complex network of interconnected nodes. This represents Earth's research and development network. Each node is an independent research institution. Universities, corporations, government laboratories, international collaborations, even individual inventors working in their garages. The display showed thousands of nodes connected by millions of relationships, with new connections forming and dissolving continuously. It was mesmerizing and chaotic and utterly unlike anything the Empire had ever seen. At any given moment, Dr. Petrov continued, there are approximately 50,000 active research projects happening on Earth. They compete with each other, collaborate with each other, and constantly build on each other's work. The result is an innovation rate that appears to be accelerating. How do you prevent duplication of effort? Dr. Zarthek asked. We don't, replied Dr. Kim. Duplication often leads to different approaches to the same problem, and different approaches often lead to breakthrough innovations. Competition drives improvement. And how do you ensure that dangerous technologies aren't developed? We can't, admitted Secretary General Chan. Humans have developed technologies capable of destroying our entire species multiple times over. But we've also developed social, political, and economic systems that manage these risks while preserving the benefits of rapid innovation. Emperor Vex then had been listening to this exchange with growing unease. The humans were describing a civilization that operated on principles completely contrary to imperial doctrine. Instead of centralized control, they had distributed independence. Instead of preventing dangerous developments, they managed them. Instead of eliminating competition, they encouraged it. Secretary General Chan, he said, this system you describe sounds highly unstable. How do you prevent chaos? We don't prevent it, Your Excellence. We adapt to it. Adapt to chaos. Chaos isn't the right word, actually. Complexity might be better. Earth is a complex system with many interacting parts. Rather than trying to control all the parts, we've learned to influence the overall patterns. Ambassador Johnson, representing something called the North American Federation, activated another display. This one showed what appeared to be a living organism, but, as the image zoomed out, it became clear that it was actually a visualization of human civilization. Human society is more like an ecosystem than a machine, he explained. It's constantly changing, evolving, adapting to new conditions. Individual parts may fail or conflict, but the overall system becomes stronger through diversity and adaptation. And this approach, Admiral Kethare said skeptically, has allowed you to develop faster than light theory in 70 years. Actually, Dr. Petrov said, that's probably our slowest area of development. We've been focused mainly on biological sciences, information technology, materials science, and energy systems. Faster-than-light travel was considered theoretical physics until your arrival provided observational data. Your slowest area? Dr. Zarthek could barely contain his disbelief. Dr. Kim activated yet another display, this one showing a timeline of human technological development. The Empire's xenologist stared in growing alarm as he realized what he was seeing. In the past century alone, humans had developed technologies that had taken the Empire centuries to achieve. In the past decade, they had made breakthroughs that the Empire was still struggling with. And, in some areas, computing, materials science, biotechnology, they appeared to have surpassed Imperial capabilities entirely. Excellence, Dr. Zarthek whispered urgently. These beings have achieved in 1 century what it took the Empire 10 centuries to accomplish. How is this possible? Emperor Vex then demanded. Competition, Ambassador Rodriguez said simply. When you have thousands of independent research groups competing to solve problems, innovation happens very quickly. When you add collaboration and information sharing, it happens even faster. But, surely, Velnara protested. This leads to conflict over resources, territorial disputes, technology hoarding? Sometimes, admitted Secretary General Chan. But, we've developed systems to manage these conflicts. International law, trade agreements, collaborative research treaties, dispute resolution mechanisms. Humanity has spent centuries learning how to compete and cooperate simultaneously. You've weaponized cooperation? Admiral Kethare asked. The humans looked confused. Weaponized? Dr. Petrov asked. You use cooperation as a tool to gain advantage over your competitors? No, Dr. Kim laughed. We cooperate because it makes everyone more successful. When research institutions share information, they all advance faster. When nations trade freely, they all become more prosperous. When different groups work together on shared challenges, they find better solutions. Emperor Vex then felt a cold realization settling in his mind. Secretary General Chun, when your scouts first observed our fleet, what was your species' immediate response? We called an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council, convened our top scientists and military experts, and began preparing for first contact protocols that had been developed over several decades. You had first contact protocols? Of course. The possibility of contact with extraterrestrial intelligence has been a subject of serious study for over a century. We have detailed plans for various scenarios, including hostile contact, beneficial contact, and technologically superior contact. And which scenario did you implement when you detected our fleet? Technologically superior, but potentially beneficial contact. Your scouts' behavior suggested scientific curiosity rather than hostile intent, and your apparent willingness to communicate indicated potential for cooperative relationships. Admiral Kethare's patterns were now displaying something very close to panic. Excellence. They classified us as potentially beneficial rather than overwhelmingly superior. Yes, said Ambassador Johnson, though we've been revising that assessment as we learn more about Imperial technology. Some of your capabilities are certainly beyond our current level, but others appear to be areas where we might have useful contributions. Contributions? Velnara's voice cracked slightly. Well, for instance, your faster-than-light technology is obviously superior to ours, but our information processing systems appear to be more advanced. Your energy capture methods are impressive, but our materials science might allow for more efficient storage solutions. Your ships are magnificent, but our automation and artificial intelligence systems might reduce crew requirements and improve performance. Dr. Zarthek was staring at his data tablet with an expression of growing horror. Excellence. I've been reviewing the technical data they've shared with us. Their computer systems are approximately 50 times more powerful than our current technology. Their material science is at least 2 centuries ahead of Imperial standards. And their artificial intelligence capabilities. He trailed off, apparently unable to continue. Dr. Zarthek? Emperor Vex then prompted. Excellence. They've created artificial intelligences that appear to be approaching sentience. They're using them to manage their global information networks, optimize their resource distribution, and accelerate their research. Each of their major nations has access to computing power that exceeds anything in the Imperial fleet. Are you saying, Admiral Kethare asked slowly, that these primitive beings have technological capabilities that exceed Imperial standards? Not primitive, Secretary General Chun corrected gently. Different. Humanity has focused on different areas of development than the Zephyrian Empire has. We're very interested in learning about your achievements, and we hope you're interested in learning about ours. Emperor Vex then stood and walked to the viewing window, looking out at the human space station that had been expanded 3 times since his arrival. In the distance, he could see dozens of small human spacecraft moving with purpose and efficiency between various installations. Secretary General Chun, how many humans are currently working in space? Permanently stationed off-world? About 50,000. But we have rotating crews of another 100,000, and our orbital industrial facilities employ about 2 million people on various schedules. 2 million people working in space. Admiral Kethare stood as well, joining the Emperor at the viewing window. Yes, though that number is growing rapidly. The arrival of your fleet has sparked tremendous interest in space-based development. Several of our major corporations are accelerating their orbital expansion plans, and 3 of our nations have announced new space exploration initiatives. Our arrival has accelerated your expansion. Absolutely. Contact with an interstellar civilization has been the catalyst for the largest space development boom in human history. We're expecting to have permanent settlements on 6 of our system's planets within the next 5 years. Emperor Vex then turned back to the conference table, his mind reeling. Everything about this first contact was contrary to Imperial experience. The humans weren't seeking protection from a superior civilization. They were using contact with the Empire as motivation for their own expansion. They weren't intimidated by Imperial technology. They were analyzing it and developing improvements. They weren't requesting integration into Imperial society. They were proposing partnership between equals. Your Excellence, Secretary General Chin said, we have a proposal we'd like to present. A proposal? Ambassador Rodriguez activated a new display, this one showing star charts that extended far beyond human space. We've been analyzing the structure of the Zephyrian Empire based on the information your scouts provided. 800 systems is an impressive achievement, but we noticed that your expansion has been primarily linear, moving from one system to adjacent systems in a relatively predictable pattern. What is your point? Humanity's mathematical models suggest that nonlinear expansion patterns might be more efficient. Instead of linear conquest, consider collaborative development. Instead of absorbing species into imperial culture, consider creating networks of allied civilizations. Dr. Petrov continued the presentation. Our preliminary calculations suggest that an alliance-based approach could result in technological advancement rates that exceed current imperial development by several orders of magnitude. Orders of magnitude, Dr. Zarthek whispered. Each species brings unique perspectives, approaches, and capabilities. Instead of homogenizing them into imperial standard patterns, preserve their diversity and encourage cross-species collaboration. The result would be an innovation network that could transform the galaxy. Emperor Vex then found himself staring at projections that suggested rates of advancement that seemed almost magical. Technologies that might take the Empire centuries to develop could be achieved in decades. Challenges that had puzzled imperial scientists for millennia could be solved through collaborative approaches. You're proposing, he said slowly, that the Empire abandon 3,000 years of successful governance in favor of an untested experimental approach. We're proposing, Secretary General Chun replied, that the Empire consider whether successful governance might be redefined. Has the current approach maximized the potential of the species under imperial rule? Has it created the strongest possible civilization? Has it prepared the galaxy for whatever challenges might exist beyond the current boundaries of known space? The questions hung in the air like accusations. For 3,000 years, the Empire had measured success by stability, control, and predictable growth. The humans were suggesting that these measures might not be enough. And if we were to consider this approach, Admiral Kethare asked, what would humanity's role be in this network? Whatever role we can most usefully fill, Dr. Kim replied. We're good at managing complex multi-party relationships, developing innovative solutions to technical challenges, and adapting quickly to changing circumstances. We're happy to contribute those capabilities wherever they're most needed. You're not seeking a leadership position? The humans looked genuinely puzzled. Leadership of what? Ambassador Johnson asked. We're talking about a collaborative network, not a hierarchy. Different participants would take leading roles on different projects based on their capabilities and interests. But someone must be in overall command, Velnara protested. Someone must have final authority. Why? Dr. Petrov asked. Humanity has managed quite well with distributed authority structures. They're more resilient, more adaptive, and more innovative than centralized systems. Emperor Vex then sat down heavily. The humans weren't just proposing to join the Empire. They were proposing to revolutionize it. They were suggesting that everything the Zephyrians had believed about governance, progress, and civilization might be wrong. Your Excellence, Secretary General Chun said gently, we understand that this is a lot to consider. We're not asking for an immediate decision. We're simply offering our perspective and our partnership. And if we decline your proposals, if we prefer to maintain imperial traditions, then we'd still be interested in whatever relationship you're comfortable with. Trade agreements, cultural exchanges, scientific cooperation, diplomatic relations, we're flexible. And if we attempt to impose imperial rule on your world? The silence that followed was different from the earlier pauses in the conversation. This one carried weight. Your Excellence, Secretary General Chun said finally, we really hope that won't be necessary. It would be unfortunate for everyone involved. Are you threatening us? Not at all. But you should understand that humanity has spent centuries developing technologies and strategies for dealing with existential threats. We don't seek conflict, but we're prepared for it if it becomes unavoidable. Admiral Kethare stood abruptly. You would fight the Imperial fleet? We would defend our independence, yes. But we'd much prefer to find mutually beneficial alternatives. Dr. Zarthek had been working furiously on his data tablet throughout this exchange. Now he looked up with an expression that combined awe and terror. Excellence, based on their technological capabilities and their development patterns, I believe these humans could present a significant military challenge to Imperial forces. Significant how? Excellence, if they can develop faster than light technology in 5 years, and if their innovation rate continues to accelerate, they could achieve military parity with the Empire within a decade. And if they formed alliances with other species using their collaborative approaches. Dr. Zarthek didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire had encountered a species that might become a peer. And that species was offering partnership instead of demanding conquest. Secretary General Chun, Emperor Vex then said, I believe we have much to discuss. We're looking forward to it, Your Excellence. We've prepared several preliminary frameworks for various types of relationships, along with some fascinating research proposals and some really excellent cultural exchange programs. As Emperor Vex then looked around the conference table at the eager, enthusiastic faces of the human representatives, he realized that the galaxy was about to become a very different place. And for the first time in his long reign, he wasn't certain whether he would be ruling that new galaxy or learning to live in it. What he didn't know was that humanity had spent the past month quietly making contact with 17 other species within Imperial space, offering them the same collaborative relationships they had proposed to the Empire. The humans hadn't been preparing for conquest or submission. They had been preparing to change everything.